like Saifuddin Ammous says, pirating is the best marketing tool. So I've seen PDFs of my book floating around. It doesn't bother me. I just want people to absorb the content and to share it with their friends and teach people about Bitcoin. I kind of start off with the basics. What is money? And that's the title of Robert Breedlove's show, which is very popular. And that's actually what sent me down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, was his series with Michael Saylor. So I felt for the audience I was trying to reach, that was a good place to start. Because if you don't understand what money is, you're not going to understand Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is better money.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Today I'm here with Mitchell, which is author of a wonderful book called The Conservative Case for Bitcoin. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing really well, Mr. M. I appreciate you having me on the show. Excited to talk.
Likewise, it's a pleasure. Of course, we're going to talk about your book, which was released in April last year. Super excited about it. Where the inspiration came from?
Yeah, so I started writing this book in 2023. And it initially for me started as just a personal project. Writing a book, something I always wanted to do, is on my bucket list. And I wanted a way to really consolidate all my ideas about Bitcoin and just have something that belonged to me. It's proof of work to show, hey, I've done the work on Bitcoin. If you want my thoughts, check it out. Because quite frankly, I was tired of normies in my life always asking me the same questions and me having to type out these paragraphs or explain it. And now I could just say, hey, check out my book. And the reason I wrote The Conservative Case for Bitcoin is because I knew 2024 was going to be an election year. I knew it was probably going to be a Bitcoin bull market. And I just kind of saw the collision of the Bitcoin world and the political world as something that was really inevitable. And I couldn't have been more fortunate with how it actually turned out, right? Because Trump took a really strong pro-Bitcoin stance. He ends up winning in November, of course, and now he's about to get inaugurated. And so him making Bitcoin such a core part of his platform, I don't think it won him the election, but it certainly puts him in a more favorable light in the minds of a lot of Bitcoiners. But more importantly, is it's opening, half of the country loves Trump. And now that entire half of the country is like going to have more of an open mind to Bitcoin because, all right, well, the president is pro Bitcoin. This person who we voted for is going to lead our country as pro Bitcoin. Maybe I should learn something about it. Maybe the government actually can't shut it down like a lot of people tend to believe. So I wrote a book that is with, conservative kind of boomer Republican types as my core audience. And I feel like I explain Bitcoin in a way that appeals to them. That's not to say, Bitcoin appeals to everyone, right? If you're a liberal or if you're a progressive or, it doesn't matter who you are, Bitcoin is for everyone. It's a neutral money, but I think you can frame it in different kinds of ways for different audiences. And so I took an audience that's familiar to me. Like I live in the American South. Before I got into Bitcoin, I was super into kind of normie right-wing politics, that area. So I felt like I could articulate Bitcoin in a way that appeals to them. But that's kind of the origin of it.
What was your journey into Bitcoin? How have you discovered it?
Yeah, I discovered it about 4 years ago, late 2020, so like I said, I come from a normie political right-wing background. And after Trump, quote unquote, lost in 2020, I mean, my trust in the systems was at an all-time low. I didn't believe the results of the election were legitimate. They had locked us in our homes for months. All my professors and everywhere at university are saying all this stuff about COVID, and, the censorship online, just all the institutions that I had been a part of. I totally lost all my trust. And then Bitcoin starts going on this bull run. It's, from what was it, September of 2020, I think it was at around 10K. And by January, it was around $40,000. And I didn't know anything about Bitcoin, but I used it to bet on the election in 2020 because I was just like, I was so confident Trump was going to win. Didn't happen. And then I realized, these magic internet coins I lost betting just doubled in value. If I would have held them, I would have actually made money. And so that sent me down the rabbit hole. I'm like, what? All right. So why are these things going up in value? I should learn about it. And then I figured out, all right, there's a limited supply, only 21 million, and it can't be shut down by any government or institution. You can't be censored. And so from there, it was like, my life has changed radically. There's no turning back at that point. So it's been about 4 years now. And I feel like there's just still so much to learn about Bitcoin.
We have, like you said, Trump getting in office fairly soon. I mean, how much of an impact do you think he's going to have? Because soon he's going to be surrounded by people that are pro-Bitcoin, right? So do you think he's going to have a massive impact into the Bitcoin economy?
Yes, and that's the simple one-word answer. But what's really attractive to me is he has the right people in his ear, right? It's one thing if he says he's pro Bitcoin, but he doesn't really understand it. We recently saw a picture of Michael Saylor and Eric Trump at Mar-a-Lago, right? If Michael Saylor's in his ear, he's obviously getting fed really high quality information about Bitcoin. It's not somebody who doesn't really know what they're talking about. And I think we have to look at this as kind of an array of possibilities. And on the lowest end, bear case is Trump is pro Bitcoin, but it's not super important to him. He prioritizes other things within the administration. Perhaps I think lowest bar is we do get an executive order of some sorts that says, hey, the Bitcoin we have, that the US government holds now, we're not going to sell it, but with no additional legislation or orders to say we're going to buy more Bitcoin. I think that's worst case scenario. And that's still incredibly bullish. I mean, we're seeing the impact of the price in the short term right now with the DOJ. It looks like they're selling some of those Silk Road Bitcoin holdings. It's affecting the price in the short term, but we haven't really broken below that 90K barrier. So to say, hey, we're not going to sell these Bitcoins, we actually want to continue to hold them. One, you're not going to see the sell pressure in the market, which is bullish. But two, you're signaling to the rest of the world that they also need to get some sort of Bitcoin position. So I think that's worst case scenario. But best case scenario is not only does Trump do that, but some legislation gets passed saying, hey, we're going to actually buy more Bitcoin, because what kind of got overshadowed in Bitcoin Nashville after Trump's speech was that Cynthia Lummis, the senator from Wyoming, had legislation in her hand to accumulate 1 million Bitcoin for the United States. If we're going to have a Republican majority in the House and the Senate, that type of legislation could very well get passed. And not just at the federal level, but we're really seeing state after state start to introduce similar legislation. And so it's really a megaphone to the rest of the world that you need to start accumulating Bitcoin, because the most powerful, most wealthy nation in the world is doing the same thing. So my kind of range for the Bitcoin price in 2025 is very wide. I mean, I think worst case scenario, we end up with a 50% gain in the year. But if nation states really start accumulating Bitcoin and they do it fast, aggressively, I don't see, if we were over $1 million this time next year, I wouldn't be surprised.
How likely do you think the cycles are going to be broken? Because now players in the game have changed massively. You have, like you said, you have nations, you have pension funds, you have companies. Do you think we're going to respect the 4-year cycles, or are we going into the so-called super cycle?
That's a great question. I don't necessarily like the word cycle, because I do believe it's going to be broken, right? To say something is cyclical implies that it's going to continue to happen the same way. And I'm resorted to using the term epoch, right? So every 4 years, every 210,000 blocks, Bitcoin has a halving. And I do think this time is different. It's a meme, but it seriously is if nation states begin accumulating Bitcoin, right? And I don't think, and this might actually be my pinned tweet on my Twitter profile, is I don't think a bull market driven by institutions buying Bitcoin and nation states buying Bitcoin is going to have a 50%, 75% drop in the Bitcoin price. It's just not going to happen, quite frankly. One, we're going to have more passive flows into Bitcoin just naturally through MicroStrategy being in popular index funds or pension funds. We're getting a more sophisticated cohort of Bitcoin adopters. If we kind of generalize here, who were the new Bitcoin adopters in 2020 and 2021? It was your Robinhood, GameStop, AMC, Dogecoin kind of crowd, right? Everybody and their mother got a $1,200 stimulus check. They're buying Bitcoin, but these aren't, they're very reflexive. They're very emotional buyers. And so, of course, it makes sense that, we went up to 70,000 and the price ultimately crashed down to 16,000 during the bear market. But with the new cohort of buyers, the Wall Street suits coming in, I think the downside is going to be far more limited. Now, the caveat there is if we get some explosive price action, like I said before, if we do go over $1 million within a year, it's very reasonable to assume we could get a 70% drop, which would put us at 300,000. So I think it's kind of too early to tell, and it depends a lot on Bitcoin's upside. But I could very reasonably see Bitcoin continuing to go up and not seeing a massive drawdown. And I'll add one more point to that. I think Bitcoin, as it's been the past 2 years, is the dominant digital asset. So if you look since the 2022 bear market, at the very bottom, Bitcoin dominance, which measures Bitcoin's market cap versus the market cap of all the other cryptos, has been in a straight line up and to the right, very little pullbacks. And typically the cycle theory as it's thought out is, Bitcoin goes up, but maybe some of the altcoins, crypto coins go up even more. That has not been the case over the past 2 years while Bitcoin's been in a raging bull market. And it's not going to be the case going forward, right? Because There's not going to be a strategic Ethereum reserve or a strategic Solana reserve. We're not seeing any of that. Bitcoin is the dominant digital asset. It's digital property. It's its own unique asset class on par with stocks, real estate, and gold. And we're not going to see that kind of demand for altcoins, in my opinion.
What's your view on ETF? I mean, we've just passed a year, so a birthday, 1 year birthday for the ETF. It was launched January 11, so not long ago, and they smashed all the records. Like we've gone to 40 billion in like a little bit over 200 days. Do you like them? Do you hate them? What's your view here?
So I don't use them personally because I'm only 24. So when I got into Bitcoin, I was about 20 years old, broke, no assets, didn't know anything about money, had terrible personal finance. I wasn't a saver, right? But if I had, let's say I had been 40 years old instead of 20 and I had been accumulating assets in a 401k or an IRA or something like that, then it might make sense to buy the ETF so you don't have to take the tax hit. But that's not my situation. So I think it's a great product for some people, not for me personally. I think where the killer application for the ETF is going to be is in-kind redemptions. So the ability to send Bitcoin directly to the ETF, or if you have the ETF, withdraw that Bitcoin into self-custody. And I think what's going to happen is this is going to compete with kind of the Bitcoin native lending platforms, right? Because you're going to be able to get far more favorable rates, I believe, borrowing against the Bitcoin ETF versus borrowing against spot Bitcoin. So I think that's one way that, BlackRock, Larry Fink and the boys are going to incentivize more people to buy the ETF is by having the in-kind redemptions and being able to borrow directly against it. Because what's an issue you have as a Bitcoiner? All right, if you bought Bitcoin 10 years ago, it's appreciated in value. How do you unlock that value without taking a tax hit? Well, one way is to borrow against it. And so I see the ETFs as being a way to do that. But with that said, like Bitcoin in cold storage is the only FU money that exists. It's the only thing that cannot be confiscated from you. It's the only wealth you can store that can't be taken in any kind of way. So if you're going to do that, I still recommend having the majority of anything you want that you don't want to be able to be taken from you. You want to save for the future. It needs to be a Bitcoin in cold storage. Like the type of person I mentioned before who has assets in a retirement account. To some degree, it's worth taking a hit so you can have Bitcoin in self-custody. Now, you don't have to do that with all of your assets, but if you have zero Bitcoin in self-custody, you're not in a prudent position financially, in my opinion.
Do you have anything else in your portfolio like gold, stock, or you're just Bitcoin?
The vast majority Bitcoin, but over the last year, I mean, I'll put it this way. I put, 1% allocation into MicroStrategy or other sort of Bitcoin proxies. That objectively, that has outperformed Bitcoin. That's ballooned up and become a larger percent of my portfolio. Bitcoin companies, so companies that Bitcoin yield is one of their KPIs and Bitcoin per share is one of their KPIs. I think those are good assets to hold because what are they doing? You're effectively buying a company that's going to get more Bitcoin on your behalf. So if you have Bitcoin in cold storage, that's savings. It's great. It's not getting you more Bitcoin and you don't want it to. You're not trying to get yield on that. But if you own shares of a company that's actively saying, hey, we're going to go out and get you more Bitcoin, that clearly, it has the potential to outperform Bitcoin. But for the reasons I said before, you definitely want to have Bitcoin in cold storage. But I don't think, some people say if you hold MicroStrategy, you're a pointer. I don't believe that at all. Like if you have assets in a retirement account, it might make more sense to buy MicroStrategy versus the Bitcoin ETF. I think a diversified Bitcoin portfolio is actually very prudent. So in the historical sense, a diversified portfolio means stocks and bonds. But I think in the Bitcoinized world, it means having cold storage Bitcoin. If that's the foundation, owning Bitcoin miners directly and mining Bitcoin, because that's a great way to be long Bitcoin. Owning some of these Bitcoin companies and maybe owning some Bitcoin ETF, all of those assets are prudent to hold in a portfolio.
How long do you think we need before other companies are going to follow Michael Saylor or Metaplanet? Do you think we're going to see in 2025 many other big brands like maybe Apple or Microsoft saying, well, you know what, maybe 2% of my portfolio, I'm going to edge it with Bitcoin?
I'm confident we're going to see a lot more companies do it. But in terms of big brands, I would say it's a 50-50 chance. And I think the most likely candidate would be Meta, right? Because if you look at Mark Zuckerberg, he has two goats. One is named Bitcoin, one is named Max. He's a Bitcoin maximalist. He's doing this whole like Alpha Chad rebrand where Instagram and Facebook are going to be pro-free speech, allegedly. I mean, he's going on Joe Rogan. He's got a perm. He's doing jujitsu, eating meat, all this kind of stuff you would associate with a Bitcoiner, to be honest. And He also, most importantly, is he owns more than 50% of the controlling shares of Meta. So as long as he's orange pilled, he can take action on that. Now, they're not going to do MicroStrategy, balls to the walls, lever up, buy Bitcoin, issue convertible bonds, buy Bitcoin. It would definitely be more of a 1 to 2 to 5% allocation of their cash reserves. But just as, Trump being pro Bitcoin is a signal to the rest of the world, Facebook or Meta being pro Bitcoin is a signal to the rest of the market that, hey, this is something even, the titans of tech are taking seriously, and you should too.
Do you think we're going to get to gold market cap? I mean, I think gold is hovering around 17 trillion and Bitcoin was about 2 trillion not long ago, a little bit less now because we corrected. Do you think we're going to eventually surpass gold?
Eventually, yes, but again, it's kind of a question of when, not if, in my opinion. And for me, Bitcoin reaching gold's market cap is the next big milestone in terms of the Bitcoin price. So we knocked off the 2021 all-time high of 69,000. We caught 100K. The next major milestone is gold's market cap. And this is something I explain to people fairly often when they say, oh, I'm late to Bitcoin. I missed the boat. There's not as much upside left. And that's objectively false. So there's a roughly 900 trillion in total assets. So if you look at stocks, bonds, real estate, gold, the market cap of all of them is roughly 900 trillion. As of today, January 2025, Bitcoin has a market cap of $2 trillion. 2 trillion out of 900 trillion is just a tiny, tiny sliver. If you imagine Bitcoin, which is the only thing you can't make more of, you can make more stocks, you can create more currency, you can issue more debt, you can mine more gold. All of those things, you can build more houses. All of those things you can make more of. But the one thing you can't make any more of is only 2 trillion out of 900 trillion. It's reasonable to me that the one thing you can't make more of would be at least 10% of the 900 trillion. So that's 90 trillion. That's a 45x from here. To me, that's a very conservative estimate because all of these assets I've named, that's how people save wealth. That is, you contribute your time and energy to society to receive wealth. How can you save it? You can't save in fiat currency because it's going to lose value. So you have to buy hard assets. You have to buy gold, stocks, real estate, all of which you can make more of. I think Bitcoin eats that market share. I think there's a massive total addressable market. We've barely scratched the surface. Bitcoin gold parity, we would still barely be scratching the surface, right? 18 trillion out of 200 trillion or 900 trillion. Sorry, that's what, 2%? I think Bitcoin gets more than 2% of that. I think it gets at least 10%, but in the maximum bullish scenario, it would get north of 50%.
Some people are saying, oh, Bitcoin is consuming a lot of energy. What's your angle here?
It depends who you're talking to. For me, and what this is the case I make in my book, is that energy consumption is a good thing for a variety of reasons. First, let's focus on actual impact on energy grids. Because if you're an energy producer, you have a problem. You do not know what demand is going to be. Demand is going to be variable. So right now it's January, it's really cold. Everyone's running their heat, they're cooking, they're doing all this stuff. If there's a blizzard or a snowstorm, everybody's going to be plugging in space heaters, right? Energy consumption is going to increase drastically compared to more temperate times of the year. So if you're an energy producer, you need to be able to produce as much energy to meet demand during these peak periods. But then when you're not at peak demand, you have a lot of waste, right? You're not using the maximum capacity of your energy production, right? And so Bitcoin miners are very unique because they can fill that gap. So they can purchase all of the excess power that can be produced, but then unplug when demand is peaking, right? And so they're this flexible load that can go anywhere, right? A lot of energy is produced in very remote, desolate locations. Typically, high consumers of energy are hospitals or grocery stores, things that are near major metropolitan areas and not necessarily where the energy is being produced. So Bitcoin miners have a unique profile as an energy consumer where they consume a lot of energy. They're geographically flexible and they can shut off at any time without actually kind of negative externalities because you don't want a hospital or a grocery store turning off during a blizzard or a heat wave, but Bitcoin miners can do that. So Bitcoin miners are the only energy consumer that fits all these requirements for the perfect flexible load. And so the fact that they do consume a lot of energy is a good thing, and it's making energy grids more robust in places where they're actually accepting and embracing Bitcoin miners. And so I think every grid needs to have some amount of Bitcoin miners hooked in, because it's going to increase our ability to produce energy as a species, and energy is life. It increases our quantity of life, our quality of life, and the whole, framing energy usage as bad. I think that's very destructive for humanity, and we need to flip the script on that, rather than trying to, say, oh no, Bitcoin doesn't actually consume energy, or Christmas lights consume. We shouldn't have to justify energy usage, because energy usage is a good thing. Society needs to produce and consume as much energy as possible.
Consumes energy compares to what? Do you think digging gold from the ground doesn't consume energy? Do you think running banks does not consume energy? I would say stores and transfer energy. So, like you said, you have to switch and study and do the work, right? I mean, how long do you think before the broader masses are going to start learning about Bitcoin, understanding, reading your books, listening to podcasts? Do you think are we close?
No, we're not. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a generational thing. So I think the baby boomers, they're never going to fully get it, not in mass. And this is kind of how technology works, right? When you're an old person and a new technology comes out, they never really fully understand it. Some of them do. That you have your outliers, but broadly speaking, as a generation, the baby boomers are not going to understand Bitcoin. But that's not a bad thing for the Bitcoin price. You don't have to have mass adoption for the Bitcoin price to move. All you have to have is the people who actually control the wealth to purchase Bitcoin. And who's purchasing Bitcoin? Well, the big, the large financial institutions, the pension funds, the sovereign wealth funds, nation states. They're going to push the Bitcoin price. We could easily see a Bitcoin price north of $1 million, while still having what you might consider low adoption on a percentage basis, right? And so I think my generation, Generation Z, I think by the time, I'm in my 50s, 60s, 70s, we'll have reached quote unquote mass adoption, in terms of a lot of people use Bitcoin to some extent as a store of value and a medium of exchange, but we'll never have, mass Bitcoin adoption in the next 10, 20 years, in my opinion. But price is still going to continue to go up, because those with the wealth who actually can move the price are going to move it. My Uncle Joe, or Billy Bob you went to high school with, they're not moving the price on Bitcoin, right? A lot of, if you think of mass adoption, most people don't even have any savings at all. So how are they going to move the Bitcoin price, versus the institutions with capital? They can move the Bitcoin price, and they are understanding Bitcoin.
It's becoming easier and easier to even talk about, Thanksgiving dinners or Christmas party or whatever, your family and uncles and aunties and whatever. Because now we have Larry Fink, who goes on TV and says, hey, I do have Bitcoin. You have BlackRock investing into this thing. You have companies, like your countries, you have Bukele on El Salvador, right? And say, okay, this thing is massively volatile, because it's either too volatile or it consumes too much energy. That's what I get in my network. But how do you deal with the volatility? What's your take on it?
My take on the volatility is that's your opportunity, right? The moment Bitcoin stops being more volatile than the stock market, there's a good chance a lot of the upside is gone. And if you can't stomach the volatility, you're a little sissy, right? It's what's a 10-15% drawdown. That's your opportunity to deploy more capital. If you look at Bitcoin over a long period of time, it goes up. Every 4 years, Bitcoin is higher than it was 4 years ago. If you can't stomach the volatility, you have to expand your time horizon. Bitcoin is not a get rich quick scheme. It's quite the opposite. It's a get rich over a long period of time scheme. And so if you're investing and you're looking for an exit within the next month, 6 months, 12 months, Bitcoin's not for you. Anybody can get on YouTube and say Bitcoin's going to do XYZ over the next month. Nobody really knows. Like, let's take that for example. In July of 2024, President Trump got shot at. The bullet missed, but if the bullet hits his head, all markets are tanking, right? There's so many unknowns that can influence the price within a short term. Nobody truly knows. So you need to expand your time horizon. Look at Bitcoin in terms of at least 4 years, preferably longer. And in that scenario, it just goes up. So it's a long-term savings machine. Don't put next month's rent into Bitcoin. Put anything whose value you want to preserve over 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, put that into Bitcoin. If you hold Bitcoin for 4 years, you'll lap your peers. If you hold Bitcoin for 8 years, you'll retire your parents. If you hold Bitcoin for 12 years, you'll retire your entire bloodline. So it's all about how long do you want to hold, because it's fundamentally number go up technology. There's going to continue to be dollars printed, but Bitcoin's finite. The longer you hold your share of the finite asset, the wealthier you're going to be.
4 years ago, when you started into your journey, what would be the biggest learning lesson you've taken so far?
Thankfully, when I got into Bitcoin, there was a lot of good content on why Bitcoin is different from altcoins. And so I never really got deep into altcoins. And I had purchased some of the hot ones from 2021, like ETH and Cardano and XRP or whatever. But after about 2-3 months of studying Bitcoin, I realized, oh, like none of this is valuable. I need to just be all in on Bitcoin. And thankfully for me, it lined up where like that was actually the top for altcoins. Most people won't be that lucky. I would tell my past self that. And that's kind of the advice I would give to new Bitcoiners, right? Or new people within crypto broadly is don't focus on any other crypto besides Bitcoin. All of that is noise. Bitcoin is the signal.
My listener, they know I am also mainly a Bitcoiner, but I have a small percentage of my portfolio I like to gamble with. I'm perfectly aware of the percentage that I'm gambling with, which is super small. Can you talk about your book a little bit? I would love to know how you build it, how you structure it, without giving away too much. Of course, guys, in the description, I will link Mitchell's book. But can you give us a little bit of a spoil on the book?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't mind spoiling it all. Like Saifedean Ammous says, pirating is the best marketing tool. So I've seen PDFs of my book floating around. It doesn't bother me. I just want people to absorb the content and to share it with their friends and teach people about Bitcoin. But yeah, link will be in the description. So I kind of start off with the basics. What is money? And that's the title of Robert Breedlove's show, which is very popular. And that's actually what sent me down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, was his series with Michael Saylor. So I felt for the audience I was trying to reach, that was a good place to start. Because if you don't understand what money is, you're not going to understand Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is better money. And so we'll start there. What is money? Well, it serves three functions. You want to store your value across time. You want to move your value across space, so a medium of exchange, the unit of account, so measuring prices within an economy. And so what properties, what physical characteristics does a money need to have in order to do good at those tasks, right? You want it to be scarce, because if you can produce the money in mass, it's not going to store value. Case in point, the dollar. The supply of dollars goes up over time. The purchasing power of each unit goes down. That's pretty elementary. What else do you need? You want it to be portable. If your money can't move, if it's a pain to physically move, it's not going to be a medium of exchange. Case in point, gold. It stores its value, but you can't use gold for payments. You can't use it at the coffee shop, but you also can't use it to purchase something on Amazon, or to send money from LA to Tokyo overnight. If you want to send billions worth of value overnight from Los Angeles to Tokyo, your best bet is Bitcoin, because it is operating 24/7, no third party, and it's portable. What else? You want fungibility. So each unit needs to be the same. Why can't you use Pokemon cards as money? Well, they're scarce. They're also fairly portable, but not each one is the same. There's no fungibility across units. So you need something that's identical. You also need something that you can store reasonably without it being physically eroded or being confiscated. Bananas can't be money, because maybe if government enforced a supply cap on bananas by gunpoint, well, they're still going to physically rot, right? And so you need something that is durable across time, which gold was, which is the scarcity and durability of gold is why it was money for a long time. But it's Bitcoin is also durable in that sense. You can hold the keys to your Bitcoin. Nobody can take it from you. It's digital, so it's not going to rot physically. Last thing is you want something that can be divided. So if you try to buy a cup of gold or a cup of coffee with gold, are you going to get out the scale and the shivel and start shaving off little pieces of gold or whatever? So Bitcoin obviously can be divided into 100 million units. You see unit bias all the time from coiners. Oh, why buy 0.0001 Bitcoin when I could buy 10 million fart coins? It's like, you don't have to think about it like that, because Bitcoin is divisible. There's 100 million Satoshis within each Bitcoin. So scarcity, portability, durability, fungibility, and divisibility. I know that's a lot of illities there, but all of these things allow money to be a store of value, a medium of exchange, and unit of account. Bitcoin objectively has these properties in a way that's better than any other good or commodity that society might want to use as money.
Fantastic, Mitchell. Thank you for being with us today.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it.
And guys, as always, I will link in the description, of course, the beautiful book, Conservative Case of Bitcoin, and of course, Mitchell tweet account. You have to follow because I enjoy your tweets. So thank you so much for contributing in this space.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. It's been good.
Guys, thank you for watching. We'll see you on the next one.